Dear students, we welcome you once again to our studios. Still we have two sessions to go. We are going to devote these two sessions to strategic management of international business. Strategic management of international business deals with the strategic aspects of business operations. Now we are going to take up one of the recent and interesting case studies, which is McDonald's in India. By now McDonald's has completed 10 years of its operations in India. It exactly started its operations in the year 1996, and it has registered success and growth. Let us see how McDonald's has started it with its entry operations and expansion strategy in accordance with the political, economic and cultural landscape of Indian economy. So basically we are going to focus on the entry strategy of the multinational enterprises in India, which is precisely we are going to study McDonald's in India, a case study. Again we have Professor Banik, Arindam Banik from International Management Institute as our resource person. I would request Professor Banik to make his presentation. I think before that I would just like to say that part of the discussion would be on business environment as such. Then we move on to the case study. Is that Professor Banik?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's basically this session deals with foreign firms or multinational firms entry strategy in Indian context. This is part of the course you have in international business. Foreign firms means we are considering McDonald's is a foreign firms, and how is actually McDonald's able to adjust the political and socio-cultural aspects in order to do business in India. And what I am planning it, we talk about the business environment in the light of McDonald's objectives in India, and then try to understand the micro aspects, what is actually lured McDonald's to come to India. And look at the Indian economy, 11th largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity basis, 2,400 billion plus income, contribution to the GDP, agriculture 25%, industry 26.2%, manufacturing 15%, services 48.5%. Economy projected to grow 10% in 2006. It is already going 7 to 8%. Potential, it has the potentiality to grow further 10% plus growth in next few years. What are the key facilitators of growth? Democratic society, vibrant capital markets, liberalization policies post 1991, access to lower cost of funds, foreign direct investments, open window. When you talk about the foreign direct investments, multinationals operation or investment in a particular country is actually part of the foreign direct investments. What are the future growth drivers of the Indian economy? biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals, entertainment, infrastructure, alternative energy, software, and information technology. The key growth driver, India's biggest asset is people. 1 billion people, growing at 1.8% annually. Middle class consumer market of 300 million populations. About 150 million people each estimated to have annual income in terms of purchasing power parity basis, $2,000 or more per annum. Consumer market expected to grow 5 to 10% annually. Reduction in the poverty rate over the last decade. Highly competitive labor cost. Highly educated with high level of comfort in English language. Want to do business in India? Few tips. The mantra, think global, act local. The Indianized Chinese. Kellogg's #2 cereals or no to cereals at all. KFC, tandoori chicken, prefer to be KFC experience. So it's basically Indianizations of KFC. McDonald's, Mac Veggie Burger and Mac Aloo Tikki is basically again Indianizations. Domino's, Pepi Paneer and Chicken Chettinad. Pizza Hut, Pizza Express, spicing it up. These are all actually Indianization of those multinational companies' recipes in the Indian context. McDonald's in India and American MNC's entry strategy. In October 1996, McDonald's opened its first Indian outlet in Basant Vihar, an affluent resident colony in India's capital, New Delhi. As of November 2004, McDonald's has opened a total of 58 restaurants, mostly in northern and western part of India. McDonald's opened 34 restaurants in 5 years. By 2001, 58 restaurants in 8 years, and another 90 restaurants are expected shortly. The growth of McDonald's in India is not as rapid as in China, but its growth is nevertheless impressive. How did McDonald's do it? How did a hamburger chain become so prominent in cultural zone dominated by non-beef, non-pork, vegetarian and regional foods such as chole bhature, kebabs, bhaji samosa, dosa, vada, sambar, bhel puri and rice? We can see the history, how they have adjusted McDonald's and their background. Ray Kroc, founder of McDonald's Corporation, opened his first McDonald's in 1955 in Des Plaines, Illinois. McDonald's is the largest global fast food retailers with more than 30,000 restaurants in 120 countries, serving 47 million customers daily and more than 1.5 million employees worldwide. The first McDonald's restaurant outside North America opened in Costa Rica in December 28, 1970. In Russia, McDonald's opened its first restaurant in January 31, 1990. As of June 2001, it has opened 60 restaurants in that country. McDonald's opened its first restaurant in People's Republic of China, Shenzhen, the special economic zones, on October 8, 1990. It opened its outlet in Beijing in 1992. As of June 1999, it has opened 235 outlets in the country. There are 164 McDonald's in 3 countries in Africa: South Africa, Egypt and Morocco. McDonald's opened its first restaurant in Japan in 1971. As of September 30, 2001, Japan has 3,717 McDonald's restaurants. McDonald's opened its first restaurant in Singapore in 1979. As of September 30, 2001, Singapore has 124 McDonald's restaurants. McDonald's opened its first restaurant in India in 1996. As of November 2004, India has 58 McDonald's restaurants. McDonald's opened its first restaurant in Pakistan in 1998. As of September 30, 2001, Pakistan has 18 McDonald's restaurants. That's the background and the growth patterns of McDonald's. So, as I mentioned, it has spreaded across most of the growth centers in India, targeting where the growth regions or incomes are basically trickling down. That simply explains there is a possibility of entry so far as McDonald's is concerned. Before looking at the McDonald's entry strategy, we should know what is actually India's food service industry, the structure, background, and what are the impediments, which is basically essential to understand why McDonald's decided to come to India. With more than 5,000 ethnic communities represented in India, 5,000 ethnic communities, it means that there are different food habits. India has a very diverse population. Each region and sub-region in India has distinct food traditions and preferences. Indian consumers typically maintain their distinct food habits even after migrating to different parts of the country. It means that even Indians migrating other parts of the world other than India, the food habits and the consumption patterns remains same despite they may be under a difficult or different socio-cultural environment. In large cities and metropolitan areas, some restaurants serve only specially regional foods. Some regional fast foods such as samosa, kebabs, chole bhature, pakora, aloo paratha, puri bhaji, dosa, luchi, cholad dal, and sambar vada are popular among Indian consumers and are available in both specially and multi-cuisine restaurants throughout India. Most Indians prefer to eat home-cooked foods and take immense pride in the varieties of food cooked at home. For most Indians, home-cooked foods are considered fresh, healthy, and inexpensive. Given the distinct dietary habits and food preference of Indian consumers, it is not surprising that until the early 1990s, Western fast food chains had largely ignored Indian markets because most of them are basically happy with their home-cooked foods. So it was difficult for foreigners to come to the market because you may not have any consumers at all. As a result, certain kind of mileage or advantage Nirulas took in certain growth pockets. Nirulas is the only notable Indian fast food chain, has been able to dominate the Indian market in fast food service in sales. Let's see the restaurants and dhabas. There are approximately 22,000 registered restaurants in India. In addition, there are more than 1 lakh dhabas, small roadside food stall, and sell a variety of food in cities on highways. By 2000, there are approximately 2,000 registered hotels in India, half of which have their restaurants. In addition, large to medium range canteens serve the food needs of various institutions such as hospitals, prisons, defense establishments, schools, colleges and universities, railways, airlines, government establishments and private companies. Since 1994, India's food imports have been growing more than 37% per annum. Half of the India's food imports are basically agricultural items, cereals, vegetables, fruits, wheat and nuts. One of the significant problems of the Indian food industry is an inefficient food chain between farmers and consumers. They produce food, but then there is a gap how and why the foods will not be reaching to the ultimate consumers, because of there are distributional problems, transport problems, and there are other problems which basically impedes farmers extremely benefit from the agriculture. About 20% of the India's food production is wasted because of too many intermediaries, poor infrastructure, poor transportation facilities. So wastage part is significant. As I said, transportation part, distributions and storage. That simply explains the inefficient way of producing foods. Considerable inefficiency in the food distribution systems cuts farmers' income while raising consumer food prices. So it is not reaching. That explains the high cost of food. Although India is the world's third largest food producer, its processing industry is very small compared to other countries in Asia. Europe and United States, despite the lack of well-developed food processing industry, India's imports of processed consumer food traditionally remain low. In other words, you basically buy the foods from the market which are not processed. It means the labor intensive, the labor component are not there. Since the early 1990s, India's food service have significantly increased. India's processed food and fast food markets have shown considerable potential for growth. So that's the period we are talking about, which is important in Indian context. 1991 is the period is deliberate here, because opening up the Indian economy and then its related activities that simply explain that the people in the growth region prefer to consume processed food, that explain the demand patterns, and that explain a particular company's intervention in the market with the help of their own product. Growing income. The long-term growth trend in India is improving. Fastest growing Indian states in 1991 to 2001 were Gujarat, Maharashtra and Delhi, appeared to be the strongest growth region. In fact, these three states during the past 10 years have been growing at the rate of Asian tiger economies in their better days. In other words, if you consider these three states' growth patterns are so significant, and if you compare the better days of the Asian tiger economies, and these three states are growing in according to that conditions. Southern states, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, and eastern states such as West Bengal are equally competitive now in this context. So you have the extreme growth regions where incomes are rising, that simply explains consumption is rising, that simply explains manufacturing rising, that simply explains employment, and that simply explains food habits are also changing. Gujarat and Maharashtra, two large western states, notched up the fastest growth between 1991 and 1998, whereas growth rates in half of the 14 biggest states of India actually declined. See the extremes. One, Gujarat and Maharashtra, they are competing each other because of the growth, and the 14 biggest states, the growth patterns are actually declined. On a per head basis, the difference is even starker. Some states where growth is slow, including the two biggest, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh, Odisha and Assam, also have fastest growing populations. So not only they are backward, they are fastest growing populations. That simply explains, on the whole analysis of India's growth patterns, these are the states is basically the major problem. So for our future economic growths are concerned. Look at the data. GDP as a macro level, 2003, 6,582 million. GDP per changing power basis 3033 in terms of billion dollars. GDP per capita income growth rate 6.8. Total population 2005 1,080 million populations. Annual population growth rate 1.3%. Urban population as a percentage is about 21%. Urban population as a percent 2004 28. See the situations. 75 to 2004, you had earlier 221% of the population urbanized. Now is only 28. Now if you take the three prosperous regions, the urbanization is quite significant, but it's not getting the appropriate justice in statistics because the problems so far 14 backward states are concerned. Population under the age of 15 as a percent of total 31%. Life expectancy at birth 63. Adult literacy rate 59%. Population below national poverty line 29%. Share of incomes and consumptions 43%. Share of income or consumption poorest 8.9%. Income distribution and market size in India. So average annual income in terms of US dollar 0 to 1,000 US dollar. We have categorized it 1,001 to 2,000, then 2,001 to 3,000, then 3,001 to 5,500, and then 5,005 and a half. And if you see the number of households, the other columns, a number of households in millions in absolute numbers, 0 to $1,000, 32% of the total households. Number of households, 64 million populations. 1,001 to 2,000, 40% of the total households. Very important point. 78% of the total households. 2,001 to 3,000, 13% of the total household. Number of households, 26.3%. 3,001 to 5,500, 8% of the total populations. Number of households, 15%. 5,500 above, 7% of the households, and number of households 13.4 million. On the whole analysis, 100 million population, 100% of the households, 197.7 million of population. That's the feature so far 2004 is concerned. And this is the macro picture. Now if you have the picture of Gujarat, Maharashtra or Delhi, it will be completely different, and you will find that there is a highly skewed population and households. Now the middle class income distribution in India, rupees 2001 to 2002 prices, that's our benchmark or base prices. Total number of households in terms of 1,000, you can see the picture. One is the distributions, the vertical column, the horizontal is the urban, rural and all India labels. You can find out urban populations from 60% of the incomes. You can find out 34.6 in urban, rural 23.9, and then all India 27%. Income from 45,000 to 90,000, middle class populations. You can find urban 32%, rural 30%, all India level 37%. And income below 47%, which is basically urban 21%, rural 42%, and all India 36%. In other words, if you see the 45,000 populations or 90,000 plus populations, what is important here, the urban middle class have a strong base and they have the potential customers of any kind of manufacturing or any kind of multinational products activities. Now, more interesting is basically how the regions are growing. You can see the bubble. Bubble is basically explained by the represents the per capita income, it means that the size of the bubbles are important in terms of and what are the contributory factors of this increase in income. In other words, we are basically trying to understand how actually liberalization or globalizations is basically helping in certain regions of India in enhancing their incomes. So, and in the process, the per capita incomes are actually increasing. Now, interesting, these figures are basically relating to 2004, and you will find out there are certain states, the southern states in particular, Gujarat and West Bengal is a new entrant now, are basically converging towards certain characteristics that's defined by services, that more particularly defined by new services, that is IT services and the financial services as a percentage of the state domestic product. And if you take the knowledge economy and new economy services, which is basically the product of post-91 situations, we can find out that Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh are basically converging. So these are the growth pockets where incomes are quite high, and why they are high, that simply explain the contributions made by the new economy aspects, so far their per capita incomes are concerned. On the other extremes, well, Punjab and Haryana is an exception, where income rise is not due to the new economy. Incomes is quite high in these states simply because of the agriculture and the green revolution effect. And more interestingly, if you see the Gujarat is not at all the new economy. It's basically a prosperous state, but Gujarat is prosperous is not to the new economy. Gujarat is prosperous because there are business environment available in the economy, and traditionally Gujarat's prosperity perhaps not due to the economic factors. People argue that culture or entrepreneurships are absolutely important why Gujarat is growing faster than other economies. And this is basically a three-dimensional graph, and we have explained the bubbles already. Now, India's economic liberalization is basically lured McDonalds to come to India. The efforts of McDonalds to enter India to earnest in the early 1990s after it successfully opened outlets in China. Executives at McDonalds were aware of India's deep suspicion of foreign companies. After all, India's colonization by the British over 3 centuries started with East India companies' trade linkage. So the multinationals is actually, so far common Indians are concerned, is always a bad elements so far their growth process are concerned. After its independence in 1947, Indian political leaders promoted rigorously the Swadeshi mantra, that they had to go by self-sufficiency, not taking help from others, the Swanir India. They pursued policies of economic nationalism in which heavy state intervention in economic matters, preference for domestic companies continued until late 1980s, because they patronize the local companies, local industries. And here they pointed out that the capital should be Indian capital, not the global capital. Global capital or foreign capital, they thought they are harmful to India. So Indian capital perhaps is positive towards India's development. India's sensitivity to cultural imperialism, the so-called Western cultural domination over Indian values, traditions, religious beliefs, customs, and food habits made the entry of foreign multinational corporations, particularly in the food industry, difficult, because there is always a problem. You can see in those days, the newspapers or media, in general, they are actually talking against the multinationals because they thought that is basically colonization of our culture, colonization of food habits. So ultimately, they will be invaded India in the long run. Other problems such as price control, inward-looking policies, public sector growth was considered or were considered as a powerful engine of growth. But the macroeconomic crisis in 1991 is actually important, and that simply explains why we need foreign capital to grow. The efforts of McDonald's to enter India is to earnest in the early 90s after it successfully opened outlets in China. A number of US-based fast food chains like KFC and Pizza Hut rushed to the Indian market because the economy opened up in 1990s as a result of Indian government's liberalization policies. McDonald's did not enter the Indian market until 1996. Instead, it spent about 6 years in planning, extensively researching Indian consumer taste, product development, supply chain arrangements before opening its first outlet in 1996. Now, here is an important point. When multinational, other food chain industries or multinational decided to come to India instantly without experimenting the Indian food habits or cultural aspects, you have seen in the newspapers, initially KFC's had to close their certain outlets because of that kind of problem, because they didn't study properly the Indian culture and other aspects. Similarly, Pizza Huts. So, the entry strategy of a particular multinational is important. How you are actually going, how you are basically adjusting the cultures, how you are basically adjusting the local environment, including political environment, including cultural environment, including business environment. It's not actually pure economics. You have to see certain non-economic factors why you basically decide to enter in a particular country like India. It's a diverse country like India. So, when basically they experimented and researched the whole things, one thing was very clear. So, from McDonald's point of view, yes, it is possible to go to India, but you have to think globally, but you have to act locally. That's the mantra. And the second part, we are actually talking about that mantra, how McDonald's is actually successful in the Indian context. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banik. As far as I gathered the information, I understand that the background for the actual case study is given in detail, and the supporting data are also given to a great extent. Now, we take on the actual discussion part in the next session, which is going to start at exactly 1 o'clock. Before that, Professor Banik, what are the actual points they should keep in mind for the discussion of this case? Can you briefly list out the main points?
Okay.
And yeah.
What we are actually planning to discuss, what is actually local management, the aspect of local management, think global, act local. Then we have to talk about the joint ventures. One of the international business aspects, if you don't know the market, you don't go directly, you take joint venture aspects, which is basically known as, if you have an asymmetric problem of investments, you take local partners for their help.
But as far as McDonald's is concerned, they have not gone for such a joint ventures, is it?
They have joint ventures with Arun Jatia in Bombay,
okay,
in Bakshi in Delhi, the northern part. Okay. They are the two managing directors.
Fine.
Yes. And then what I say, the politically correct strategy. We'll be talking about the religion bias in defining their products and recipes. You know, the percentage was 80% of the India's population are basically Hindus, followed by 50 million people are Muslims, and others are basically other religious beliefs. And so when you basically try to introduce a product, you should know which market you are actually talking about, the cultures and religions. Then we'll be talking about if you see the recipes, they are reflected the religion and the neutrality in selecting their products which are available across all outlets. Employment opportunities, as McDonald's created employment or not. There are certain problems that across all the population, that these are our junk food, these are hazardous to the children, and how is actually McDonald's defending their strategy. Corporate citizenships. Then we will be talking about the pricing mechanism of McDonald's. And then we will be talking about household expenditures as far as India is concerned, and how they spend money in terms of processed foods. Then there's a concept in international finance called Big Mac Index, how it is important and why it is determining a particular country's currency, overvalued or undervalued. We'll explain these situations. The tremendous supply chain management, so far McDonald's is concerned. One front, you have the seeds, the other front is the wheat, the other front is the chicken and the muttons, how they are basically well planned. That part we will be discussing with the help of there's an excellent supply chain management. We'll explain this supply chain. Who are the
So these are basically the points which are going to
we are basically trying
to discuss in the actual
right.
case
in the
study.
second part. Yes,
So,
yes.
So in the next session, let us see what is the actual road map by the McDonald's in India. We really welcome you for the discussion. Then only it will be interesting when we are discussing the case study. Your participation will make it more interesting. This is what we expect. And with this we conclude this session, and the next session. Achha. Bhopal, please ask your question. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Morning, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
I am Colonel Mahmood from Bhopal Center.
Yes. Yes, please.
First of all, thanks a lot. Such a active and very nice all have learned a few points which I would like to highlight is
Yeah.
that publicity of such type conferences given in newspaper or the television, so that more number of students can attend this. That is one.
Yeah.
And second is the questions which are coming in mind. They can be done and you can cover it in your next teleconference if it is not possible during.
Okay,
That's about all.
we have noted your points.
Thank you very much.
We'll consider them in future, and definitely these programs are to be telecasted in future. Actually, we welcome the participation from the students. Then only we can make it more effective and interesting. This is lacking from the students' side also. I think in future we have more interaction to really make it a success. Thank you very much. We'll meet exactly at 1 o'clock. Till then, thank you.